Welcome back for a direct head-to-head paint-off between Artrage 6 and Rebelle 4, the two best natural media simulators in digital painting. But before we get there, I wanted to start out in Adobe Fresco and just remind myself why I don't paint in Adobe Fresco. It's fine on the iPad and it's got some good touch-based stuff, but I just don't think, even on the iPad, I don't use it very much. Part of that is the subscription model, and part of that is it's just not as robust of a tool. And then here is Corel, $430. That is, what is that? Almost 6 or 7 times the cost of Artrage or Rebelle, and it's not 6 or 7 times the software. It's not even. I don't even think it's as good as Artrage or Rebelle, and for that money, that is just not okay. I have used Corel Painter. In full disclosure, I don't have the newest version, but every time I buy it again, I always end up not using it because I think there's more intuitive stuff out there, and it's a good product and it's cool and it does neat stuff, but I really think the best natural media simulation comes from different places, and in my belief, Artrage and Rebelle are the top right now. And I am doing today's direct head-to-head because I just really think that there's some cool stuff and some special stuff going on with these software packages. And I started today's painting. Now here's what I did. I did the exact same painting twice. The whole thing took maybe an hour and 50 minutes. The Rebelle painting took me longer than the Artrage painting because I am so much more used to Artrage than I am Rebelle. And also maybe because I painted Artrage second, so I kind of was a little bit more familiar with the subject here. The reference picture here is from pixels.com, and I just thought it would be fun to paint this reflection and these figures kind of floating around these lily pads and stuff. So, all that said, as you saw in my first look at Rebelle 4, I used a background layer with watercolor, and I really love the watercolor in Rebelle. I think it's pretty much unrivaled. The way that sits behind the oil painting, it looks so good. So that was a no-brainer for me. That's kind of part of my go-to process now if I paint in Rebelle. That said, I've only painted a handful of paintings in Rebelle, and they've all been done pretty quickly, just because right now I don't have a tremendous amount of free time, so I'm doing my best. I am using predominantly my own custom brush and brushes in Rebelle. I like the default brushes, but I like my own more, and so I'm using my own custom brushes. I don't feel like that's cheating to do that in comparison with Artrage, because in Artrage I can do the same thing. I have custom brush sets for Artrage, and I like those too. And I kind of have in Artrage I've like got everything dialed in super to find exactly what I want for each setting. One thing to talk about though with brush settings here, Artrage has a very simple approach to that. If you just pick the oil brush, you can use the sliders to turn a filbert into a round, into a flat, into a whatever, right? And into something that simulates kind of even a fan brush. And that's all done with sliders. And you can choose the stiffness of the brush, the aspect, the angle, the rotation, all kinds of things. But it's all just, like 6 or 7 sliders, and that's it. And you can make just about every brush that you have in your brush kit at home for like, your traditional painting setup. For Rebelle, what you have is something that's a little bit more like Photoshop, where you have a shape of the brush head, which is kind of like a stamp, and then you have a grain, which represents sort of like a texture, and those two things work in tandem to interact with whatever canvas texture you have laid down in your composition. So I think the Artrage solution for that is a little bit more I think it's more elegant for the traditional artist because you can just slide a brush one way or another. It becomes a round or a filbert. You click a button and your filbert goes from a filbert to a flat, right? So to me, that's a like a win for Artrage. But then if you look at Rebelle, there's this very Photoshop-like approach where you have, like I said, brush head and grain, and you see those right there in the top right. You can see that vertical shape and then that kind of gray, spongy-looking grain texture. And there's a lot you can do there. And look at all those sliders that you can play with. It's pretty outstanding. But it does work in just a different way than I think it does in Artrage. I think that the Artrage way is a little more, it's more like traditional painting, right? But they both work really well, and they both give you a lot of agency to paint in the way that you want to paint. It's just that they're going to take a little bit different. It's just a little bit different mindset and a little different approach, and a little, just gonna each one's gonna have their quirks for getting what you want out of it. I have not spent enough time with the brush designer here to be able to get the most out of it for sure. But I do feel like it's easy to get great results. I think, Artrage also has a custom brush designer, and I think it works well, but it's a little cumbersome, a little bit. And I think for Artrage, the best thing to do is just modify the oil brush with the sliders, and you can get your best results there. With Rebelle, I think you can get into their brush creator and get more, I guess, like high-end outcomes pretty easily. Stuff that just really works. So pros and cons for each. I don't think I was able to get a giant, huge brush when I was painting in Rebelle. So I kind of had to do more brush strokes. Whereas Artrage, I think, lets me blow up my brush to like 500%. So it's like I can get this huge stroke. I use the same exact canvas dimensions here as I did in the Artrage painting, and you'll see the difference. But I think it works well in both cases. Another thing, and part of that too could be like how I created the brush. I'm sure I can make a brush that's larger. I just need to understand what slider does that. So that's probably a user error right there, as I'm kind of a rookie with Rebelle. But what else do I want to say? When I pointed out in my first look at oil painting in Rebelle, I talked about how there are 4 settings. There's the kind of it's kind of like dry brushy, kind of like no mix. And then there's the like squishier, kind of mix a little on the canvas. Then there's a mix a lot on the canvas. And then there's just a pure blender. So whatever brush you have, you can choose it to be a blender all the way into like a kind of just an opaque mark that doesn't blend much. And having that versatility at the click of a button to change the amount of blending that your tool is doing is awesome. And while it's not, I think it's just a really elegant way to say, hey, here's how much moisture I'm painting with. Because like in real oil paints, you're controlling that with how gooey your paint is, how much turpentine you're using, etc. If you're adding liquid or a medium to your paint, whatever. So in real painting, you have those controls. And here in Rebelle, you just have that at the click of a button. And I think it works really well. In Artrage, you get to that sort of interactivity with like it's not as direct, but it is intuitive in its own way, right? You get to it through stiffness of bristles or the loading on the brush or things like that. And that works really well too. But I do think that as I kind of sit with these two pieces of software and as I paint with them, I feel like Rebelle is in a way like a hybrid of Artrage and Photoshop. It's almost like if Photoshop ever figured out how to do true natural media simulation and did it better than they're doing it with Fresco, it would be kind of like this. But I really think that there are some intuitive and elegant design solutions to allowing the artist to paint in the way they want to paint in Rebelle. And I think it's very effective. And if you look at the outcome here, what I'm trying to do is paint with that kind of loose, painterly style, that alla prima style, where you can feel the painting is not, I'm not delineating everything, I'm just suggesting everything. And that's the way I like to work. That's the way I interpret the world. And so I was able to do that with great confidence. And then if I look here at the Artrage painting, I'm sorry I forgot to record maybe the first 10 or 15 strokes, but you can see already, I think the difference is I have a sharper, distinctively angular tool. And that's because I love that kind of flat, more than a filbert feel when I'm painting, and I'm really easily able to generate that in Artrage. That's partly because I'm so dang comfortable with it. I've been painting with this tool for years and years and years, and I've kind of come to my own kind of perfect applications of what I want to do. I know exactly how to get what I want with this tool since I've been using it forever. That said, you can see everything you need to see on the sliders up there. If you like the style of brush that I'm using, there it is right there. Pressure, thinner, loading, depth, gloss, aspect, rotation, and stiffness. Those sliders, you set those sliders to those values and you'll get my brush. Now, another thing that I did, I was painting in Rebelle on like a natural looking canvas texture. Well, in this case, I'm actually painting on the, it's like a crumpled paper preset. And I like it because it feels like when oil paint on the brush starts to dry out, like you need to go re-wet your tool, it leaves these kind of like chunky, pillowy little, or pillow-like little circular shapes on the canvas. And so I can get that with this paper texture really well. So it, even more than like a canvas setting or like a natural canvas or linen, I feel like this like heavy crumpled paper gives me exactly what I want it to look like, to simulate real oils. You can see that my approach, even though it's real similar to what I did in Rebelle, it just has such a different feel. And what I'm surprised about is how much both of them look like real painting. They just look like real paintings by slightly different artists, you know. I guess they both look like paintings done by me, but there's a different enough feel to them that it's just different. It just is. So I'm curious about that, though. I'm curious about how you can have two pieces of software both doing a great job at representing realistic oil painting, but that there is enough difference in outcome and approach that they feel unique, they feel distinct. I wonder if it's sort of like, I don't know. Maybe it's like I'm going to tinker around a little more and see if I can try to make them feel identical. Well, really dial in the brush settings, really dial in the canvas settings, and see if I can really do something that's indistinguishable. I'm not sure if I'll be able to pull it off, but I think it's worth a try. And then I took a little inspiration here for a second, a little detour from Rebelle with their watercolors to add a little watercolor to Artrage here. And the watercolors in Artrage are awesome, but they're not as realistic as they are in Rebelle. There's a lot more like water physics or something, fluid physics going on, fluid dynamics going on with the Rebelle one, where Artrage, it's definitely more realistic than Photoshop, but it's not. Their watercolors aren't currently at the level of Rebelle. I love the way that the paint is starting to mix. One of the things that I think Artrage does so incredibly well is that the paint, it really starts to build up. So you maybe put, as the way I paint with kind of the thinners all the way down and not loading too much paint on the canvas or onto the brush, you can start to lay in some paint. And then, but as you start getting layers, that paint gets gooier and chunkier and mixes more. And that's just exactly what happens in real oil painting. And so when you do that, it just feels so good. I have not too much further to go in this painting, and we'll be kind of doing a direct comparison, looking at them side by side with kind of the final image. But I just wanted to speak a little bit to the feeling. Again, I'm way more comfortable in Artrage because I've been using it forever, but the feeling of painting in both of these pieces of software is really good. And I think there are a couple little things that just, separate them. I just think the way they go about things is a little different. I think Artrage takes the most simple approach when it comes to brush creation for just modifying their oil brush. But I think that Rebelle has maybe a better brush creator for getting, high-end brushes out of their brush designer. Artrage allows you to use multiple references at once. Rebelle gives you one reference at a time. I feel like, though, there's not a heck of a lot that, like, if I would be happy with either piece of software, you know what I mean? If like I could only use one, there's certainly things I would miss, but they're both really good. And right now, I know there are a couple outliers. There's a couple like small companies that are doing some super cool stuff, and I keep getting great messages from you guys about that. But for right now, I think for most people, using Artrage or Rebelle is it's all you need. And I can see if people only can afford one, for example, they might say, oh, I really have to have the watercolors of Rebelle, or they might say, oh, I really have to have the multiple references and brush creation of Artrage or whatever. There's going to be pros and cons to each, but I think let's do the direct head-to-head, and then we can kind of get into the details, but I think you can't really lose with either one. As I wrap this up, I just wanted to tell you I did a little bit of like a good old-fashioned paint dump under the background, giving kind of like a brown color to the underlayer, just to kind of speed things along a little bit. So I really thought this painting was a lot of fun, and I'm curious to do the head-to-head, so let's go ahead and check that out now. Here's the two outcomes, and you can see just a couple interesting things. Rebelle puts this like canvas texture down, and it has a kind of that deckled edge of the actual like natural media surface, and so then it frames that with, when you export it as a JPEG, that kind of transparent frame around can become a black background, and that's what that is. That's not part of the painting. But if we look at just the paint body, the paint texture, and how it interacts with the surface, I think they both read like real paint. The actual three-dimensional texture of the strokes in Rebelle is incredibly realistic. And I think that's also true in Artrage. I use such an angular brush with Artrage, though, that it reads a little bit more digital. Whereas in Rebelle, I had a sort of a little bit softer edge to the brush, and so it reads very naturalistic, I think. I did end up in response to the way I was working so fast in the Artrage version, I kept things even more simple. I didn't paint the little flowery, petally kind of textures in the boats, the flowers in front of the figures. I didn't in the Artrage one, and I didn't even suggest faces. I just kind of put masks of like, boom, one stroke, boom, one shadow, boom, one highlight, and I would say that overall I like the look of the Artrage painting a little better, but I think that the feeling of the brushstrokes is a little more realistic in Rebelle. So it's just down to your preference. I think I need to do more of these head-to-heads. I need to try painting a portrait. I need to try painting like an apple or something, and just kind of getting into something very simple. Like an apple would be so instructive, but I thought either way, though, like this is a good start to a cool series of just seeing how the software can handle different things. And if you could see me right now, I'm just smiling because it's so fun to be able to have such great tools at your fingertips. So I'm curious which one you like better. I genuinely wonder which one you like better. And we'll keep doing this, maybe once a week and just kind of see what everybody's thoughts are. But super fun. I definitely have a little bit of a learning curve with Rebelle still, but what a blast. I'm so grateful for these two companies making such great software that we can have this conversation in this way. And I'm also so grateful that these two pieces of software are so affordable by comparison. I know that there's free stuff out there like Krita, or if you're a student, you can get any of the Autodesk stuff for free, or there's Affinity. There's all kinds of stuff that's like free or freeware or open source. And then there's like the high-end professional stuff that's subscription, like Adobe. And then there's the high-end one-time use purchase or one-time purchase, like Corel Painter. And the costs just really add up over the years. But I love that these two pieces of software are so competent, so capable, and so affordable. I'm curious to know which one you like better. Hopefully you enjoyed this head-to-head. Thank you guys for checking it out. Thank you guys for following. Thanks for doing the support in any way that you can. All right. Take care and best wishes.